Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this year's Wingate Prize. My name is Michaela Broomberg, and I'm Head of Arts and Culture at JW3. Our programme is currently online, but our building remains open and incredibly busy. Since last April, we've been running a food bank and community kitchen, which has distributed over 100,000 meals to people in need. And during that time, we've created a full and vibrant programme of classes, courses, screenings, performances, book launches, talks and discussions. So thank you for joining us here, and thank you for your continued support. And now on to the exciting event of tonight. In a year when so much of arts and culture has struggled, it's reassuring that books are thriving. And the book sales are the highest they've been for 7 years, and independent bookshops are opening up all over the country, I think over 50 this year. So it's reassuring that it's doing so well, and that it's a form that can even be produced in a pandemic. We really, really value our relationship with the Wingate Prize, and each year it's captured the very best in Jewish writing from around the globe, and this year is no exception. It is an incredible shortlist that you have tonight that you'll be presented with. It's a very wonderful list and a very diverse set of books as well. So usually at JW3 we host the judges meetings and we see the books pour in throughout the year, and the actual event tonight we would be at JW3. We're all virtual, we are still, and it has been a lovely process working with the magnificent Juliet Simmons, who's put tonight all together, and with the wonderful Emily Kasriel, who will be hosting. So let me introduce you to Emily Kasriel. So she is going to be your chair for tonight's panel. Sorry. Now, Emily is practitioner in resident at LSE, working on deep listening, and she's also an executive coach. She is the head of special projects at the BBC World Service Group and a visiting fellow at Side Business School. And she's here in her role as chair of the Wingate Prize. So let me bring on screen to welcome you and introduce the wonderful judges and writers, Emily Kasriel.
Hi, thanks so much, Michaela. And by the way, I'm not doing all those things at once, and I am a trustee of the Wingate rather than the chair, but thank you so much for your very kind introduction, and really delighted to be with everybody here and welcoming everybody coming from London and Paris and Tel Aviv this evening, or of course in the morning in California or the afternoon in New York. And please feel free to jot in the chat where you are joining us from, because it's always lovely, and that's one of the lovely things about doing things on Zoom, the fact that everybody can join us in person, so to speak. It's a compensation for a virtual world. So today's special discussion is about the Wingate Prize shortlisted books, and we're going to be announcing the winner. As well, everybody who's with us today on the call, one of you will also be a winner, because one of you is going to win all the shortlisted books, and you can see them on my fireplace over here, all of them. So you better stay tuned throughout this hour so you know which one you're going to be able to read first. We're going to be discussing all the books, the fiction and non-fiction books, the shortlist for the Wingate Prize, through one key character each. And we've got quite a gathering today, and again, something perhaps that wouldn't be possible in real life. So we've got 6 of the 7 shortlisted authors and an array of other authors and publishers. Thank you, so great to have you with us. And we have also got all our 4 judges. And it's going to be such a compelling discussion, I think, that the only reason you're going to want to do anything else or get down your phone, look at your phone, is to tweet using the hashtag Wingate Prize 2021. So, joined by our superb judges who really had a hell of a job this year getting through things, but perhaps a compensation for lockdown life, Badisha, who has got so many hats, an excelled broadcaster, a writer of books, a journalist, a director of films, and her latest film set series, Aura, is the sort of creative response to self-help videos and well worth a watch. Rabbi Laura Jana Klausner, you were senior rabbi to Reform Judaism for many years. You lived in Jerusalem for another many years, leading Israeli-Palestinian dialogue amongst many things. And now you're running a leadership consultancy, Black Swans, which you co-founded. A.D. Miller, Andy, you were correspondent for The Economist in Russia and the American South, and you're now the magazine's culture editor. And I have to say, I always start The Economist reading it from the back first, so it's the best bit of The Economist, in my opinion. Your first novel, Snowdrops, was shortlisted for the Booker and numerous other prizes, and you're also the author of The Earl of Petticoat Lane, which was shortlisted for the Wingate Prize. And Anne Sieber, an award-winning biographer, historian and author with 11 books to your name, many about iconic, strong women who are carving out a life against the odds. And your latest book, Ethel Rosenberg, A Cold War Tragedy, is going to be published in the UK and the US in June. So before we start our discussion, let's have the authors tell you a little bit about their books.
My book, When Time Stopped, is about my search for my father, my search for my father's family, actually, for my family through time. I am just so thrilled and over the moon and honored and in complete disbelief, really, that When Time Stopped is on the shortlist for this year's Wingate Prize. Thank you.
A Paragon is a novel about a real-life Israeli and a real-life Palestinian, Rami and Bassam, who travel the world telling the stories of their daughters whom they lost tragically to the conflict, but whom they, in a sort of Scheherazade-like moment, bring their daughters alive and bring the message of peace and hope back into the world by the act and the art of storytelling. And it is such a pleasure for this to be nominated for the Wingate Prize alongside so many esteemed colleagues. It was one of the thrills of my literary life to be shortlisted for this award. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you so much.
My book is called House of Glass, and it's a story of my grandmother and her three brothers who were in Paris up to the beginning of World War II. And I spent 20 years researching it, which is a very strange way to spend one's adult life. But I am so completely overwhelmed to be on the shortlist for the Wingate Prize. I've been following the Wingate Prize for so long, and so many books that I love have won it. So it's hugely, hugely exciting to me to be included on the shortlist. Thanks so much.
I'm the author of Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, which I have here. And it is a book about my grandmother's life. It is her life story told in her voice from beyond the grave through me. And it's about our relationship and her relationship with my mother and with her mother. And it is a Jewish matrilineal love story about grief and living on through the stories that we tell the daughters who come after us. I am humbled to be in the company of such esteemed writers. It is mind-boggling to me. So thank you for shortlisting me and considering this book and my grandmother's life story.
On Division is a book about the life of Sari Eckstein, who's a Hasidic woman who lives in Williamsburg. And she's a grandmother, and she gets unexpectedly pregnant with twins. Oops. And it's also about the kinds of divisions that come up between people. And thank you so very much.
The story is about a young woman called Fanny Kaisman who sets out into a wild journey in 19th century Eastern Europe, and she tries to locate and find the lost husband of her sister. And I'm extremely honored to be shortlisted for the Wingate Prize.
afternoon, we're going to try something a little different. We're going to be discussing the books one by one, and we're going to be talking to our judges about the books. So they're all interested in particular books, well, they're all interested in all of the books, but they've chosen particular books. And then we're going to have the author, in almost all of the cases, join us and hear their response. And if you've read any of the books and you want to comment, please contribute in chat so that we can have a parallel discussion. It will be great. We might be able to bring in some of your ideas, and it's great that you can share them with everybody here. So we're going to kick off by looking at House of Glass by Hadley Freeman. And I've asked Badisha to join us for this conversation. And it's really an extraordinary memoir about Hadley's family. 4 siblings who have battled poverty and pogroms in a shtetl and then fled to Paris, where her great uncle Alex was to achieve a quite extraordinary transformation, spurred on by a strong belief in himself and a thirst for beauty, to lead the most astonishing life, even employing a young Christian Dior and later hanging out with Picasso. So Badisha, what did you make of Alex, a very complicated and intriguing figure?
All the siblings are complicated and intriguing, and that's why this book is so incredibly compelling. But Alex in particular has that amazing ability to self-make. He is pragmatic, he's tough, he's able to cross all different lines in society. So he can go from being a gallerist to being a costumier to being a couturier to being around people that he's been around all his life, to high society, middle and low. But the flip side of that chameleonic ability is that, as Hadley implies, and I'm not giving any of these secrets away in the book, a certain moral flexibility, shall we say, which Hadley leaves very generously open. I was also really drawn to the book because I'd followed Hadley Freeman's work for a very long time. So I was intrigued to see what this book was going to become, because it feels to me like a real labor of love. I understand that it takes 20 years to think about a story as big as this. That's why I adored it.
It was fantastic. And I love the way that Hadley felt she was really honest, using her journalistic eye to say when she felt that her great uncle was puffing himself up or not being totally honest about his activities during the Second World War and the things he had to do to survive.
Big stories need big characters, and part of the attractions of this book are its novelistic dimensions. You want people to be charismatic and complicated and ambitious and to survive and to keep lots of secrets. You know, if we all told all our secrets at the beginning, there'd be no books to be written and no projects for subsequent generations to unearth. I really admire the author for literally starting this book from a few clues that she found.
And let's ask Hadley to join us now. And I had a feeling that you were immensely fond and proud of your great uncle. That shone through.
Well, I'm glad that shone through. He, of all the characters in this book, he was the one I knew best. He died in 1999 when I was 21. And he was an amazing character. Thank you both so much for saying such kind words about him and about the book. I feel very overwhelmed by that. One of the reasons the book took me so long to write was I just had no faith that I would be able to do Alex justice, because he was, like you say, a really incredible character.
And did you feel at all, because you were doing something so private and yet you were sharing, did you have those difficult decisions to make about how open to be about the process in order to, not make your family embarrassed and not, how did you handle all of that, Hadley?
Well, this is going to sound incredibly sort of faux humility and everything, but I really mean it. I honestly didn't expect anyone other than my dad to read this book. I just thought, who else will want to read about our family but my parents? So I was mainly writing it for him and thinking about what he would want to read. And I also know from reading lots of family memoirs, Jewish and not, that the most important thing is to be honest. That's where you get the truth of the character. If you're just whitewashing, then it's not interesting. And so I wrote the character as I'd want to read it and as he really was.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hadley, and thank you, Badisha, as well. So we're going to move now to our next book, On Division by Goldie Goldbloom, and asking that that Rabbi Laura Jana Klausner and the judge will come and join me for a little quick conversation about that book. And On Division is a really moving novel. It's a very key central character, Suri, who is a prominent member of this very tight-knit Hasidic Brooklyn community, and her status and family are paramount. The pressure she feels to get good matches for her 3 unmarried kids and countless grandchildren. And then at 57, she discovers she's pregnant with twins. And therefore, a really growing rift she felt between her and the community. And I was wondering, Rabbi Laura, you come from a Reform community, and how much did you identify with Suri as a character?
Well, I'm 57. And actually, I didn't think about that until this evening. I was thinking, God, that's why. I think Jews identify with each other. We're not Reformed Jews, we're Jews. So I identified what I adored about this book. First of all, the relationship with her husband is so tender. And I haven't read, Jewish or otherwise, such a glorious description of a good marriage. So that first I just loved. It made Judaism super accessible, not in a watered down way, but just like sort of as though it's the path you're walking on, and then this stuff happens around it. So I really identified with the background. And with her, what I loved is that Goldie wrote about the shame, the possibility that she would be called a hussy just for having sex with her husband, which she should. So this thing where you do the right thing and then you get shamed, what that's like. But most of all, I adored the tenderness and also her liberation, really. She goes out and does different things, which you'll read about. And I just simply loved her and her husband, appropriately called Yiddle, which I thought was great, bit of humor, put it in there, that's wonderful. And also at this time when we're looking at the spectrum of our Jewish communities, and Haredi communities, strictly Orthodox communities, are coming under scrutiny in such a way because of COVID and so on. It is lovely, the wholeheartedness of this book.
It is really beautiful, the amount of love between her and her husband and with the whole family. And Goldie, I'd like you to join us now, if we can possibly highlight you in the conversation. And I was thinking about Suri, who is an insider-outsider, and you too, on some level, are an insider and outsider. And is that why you chose to depict her journey in the way you did?
Oh, that's such a good question. When I started to write about Suri, I wanted to write as accurately as I possibly could about from inside the Jewish community, because I don't think that there's that many accurate portrayals of what it's like to be a Hasidic woman, an Orthodox woman inside the community. And I love Suri, and I really, thank you so much, Rabbi Laura. I really love Yiddle. I like their relationship. And again, that was a portrayal of what I see in my own community. I see that a lot of people have beautiful marriages, and that's not the way the outside world perceives us. And I thought,
And I was reading somewhere that you asked not friends to check it because it was so important for it to be accurate. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I wanted to make sure that I didn't make any silly errors that make people pop out of the book and say, oh, that's not my story. I wanted people to read the book and say, that's me. And not, yes, I wanted Jewish people to read the book and say, that's me. But I also wanted non-Jewish people to read the book and say, that's me as well.
That's really, really beautiful. Thank you so very much, Goldie and Rabbi Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So we're now going to turn to our third book of this evening, The Slaughterman's Daughter by Yaniv Yitzkovich. And Andy, A.D. Miller, if I can call you Andy, is going to come and have a chat with me about it. So Slaughterman's Daughter is set in a small town in Tsarist Russia, and it's about a sister, Fanny Kaisman, who is so outraged that her sister's husband has abandoned her sister, so she sets out to track him down. And while it's quite normal for many men in that community to abandon their families and seek fortune in Palestine or America, it's unheard of for a woman. woman. So Andy, did you find her a compelling heroine?
I did. I mean, the book and Fanny go in all kinds of unexpected directions. I mean, you mentioned that it begins in a shtetl in the Pale of Settlement towards the end of the 19th century. And Fanny is a devoted mother of 5, but there's something special about her, which is that, as the title of the book suggests, she's the daughter of a shochet, a slaughterman. And when she was a child, she developed a fascination with slaughtering animals. And the consequence of that is 2 things. She has a nickname in her little community of the wilde chaya, the wild beast. And she also has a knife permanently strapped to her thigh. And when at the beginning of the book, she sets out to retrieve her wayward brother-in-law who has deserted her sister, she takes, of course, the knife with her. And it turns out to be a perilous journey. And pretty soon she needs the knife. And then the story goes and spirals from there. But really her quest, what's fascinating about Fanny is that her quest to find her brother-in-law, who turns out to be in the great metropolis of Minsk, on the way, she becomes a kind of avenging angel. I mean, not just for the wrong that's been done to her sister, but sort of for all the wrongs that have been done to Jews and also sort of more broadly to women. And she comes to see this mission to put her family back together as her own little part of repairing the world.
It's absolutely incredibly compelling and beautiful. And Yaniv, if you could join us now, that would be fantastic. And I was thinking that, Fanny is quite a complex heroine or hero, Yaniv, because she's freedom loving, but yet she's pretty ruthless. There's a lot of blood and throats being slit, and not just animals.
Yeah, but first of all, she does it in a kosher way. So it's important that all the killings will be made upon the Jewish faith and the ritual slaughter. Yeah, I felt that when I started to write the book, I came upon a lot of newspaper ads with a lot of women crying for the help of their community to find their lost husbands. So I really felt that it was a kind of a phenomenon back then. And by the way, in Israel, even right now, not just in Israel, in a lot of Orthodox community, the women are chained. They cannot get a divorce if the husband doesn't approve it. So I felt that she needs to be less polite and more violent to break the norms of society then and perhaps even today.
And I'm wondering about her abandoning her own 5 children, because I found that hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I just was wondering about her, just what was going through her mind as a character when she undertook this journey of liberation. But that bit I was puzzled around.
Yeah, well, this is why most women and people in general don't do what Fanny does, because they have children. But I wanted her to be similar a bit to the husband that she is chasing, because he also left his wife and his children, and he's supposed to be the villain. But in order to capture him, she has to do something very similar to what he does. So I found it interesting to play. On the one hand, they are very, very much apart and different, but on the other hand, there are similar, lines between them.
That's fascinating, Yaniv. Thank you so very much. And thank you to Andy. So we're now going to move to our next book, Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, by Bess Kalb. And I'd like to ask Badisha to join me again to discuss it. And here we have a very rich book full of stories told in the first person by Bess's grandmother, Bobby, who actually is no longer alive. But the character of the grandmother comes through so clearly because Bess has saved all her voicemails and her texts. It was just hearing that first voice was very powerful for me. What about you, Badisha?
I completely agree with you. And that's exactly what drew me to this. In fact, I was a real champion for this in our meetings, even though we all loved all of the books that are on our shortlist. But I remember saying, I need Hulu or Amazon or Netflix to immediately adapt this into a massive hit series, because I hear this woman's voice as a character and I can see her standing in front of me immediately. It's not just about voicemails, it's sort of about how we convey really robust family advice. I absolutely agree that this is about a matrilineal line and the warp and weft of all of that. So it's not just about sort of love and adoration gushing down the generations. It's about, did I fulfill my ambitions? Did you? What are my loving ambitions for you? Are you going to get there? And it's also the story of transformation. So the central character has gone through extraordinary transformations in her life. You see class changes, you see location changes, and you see glamour and beauty and striving, and all of that sort of passed down in the form of really impeccable humor and character. It's so vivid that you find yourself laughing and joking along from the first page to the last. It's a small book in size, but it packs a whole lot of punch.
It's fantastic. There's some real great lines, like never buy fake anything. It's sort of scattered throughout. And Bess, can I ask you to join us now? Really great to have you here. And I was wondering about how hard it was for you to sort of channel, because obviously there was some real life stuff you had from your grandmother, but then the fact she's no longer alive and making her alive again, and how that was, that process.
I'm tempted not to say anything. Thank you, Badisha, for that. I feel like I can only ruin it. This is, here the how gratifying as an author and a granddaughter to hear the book received in such a way, and to know that my grandmother's story resonated with you that way. And in answer to your question, this was a private grief exercise done to bring her back for my own edification as a bereft granddaughter, which is in itself a silly thing to be. Grandmothers die. That is the natural order of things. I was doing this because we had this incredibly close relationship. She helped raise me when my mother went back to her medical residency when I was a newborn, when I was an infant. And so I was doing this just to access her again. And so if I could feel her presence and conjure her voice and her spirit at the same time without sounding too woo-woo, which I'm not, but if I could access her, then maybe that would translate to the page in a way that would be more universal. And how gratified am I to hear that it was.
It was really amazing. But when you were bringing her to life in a way that was going beyond things that happened, or having to create and imagine what she was saying, I'm wondering about that process.
Yeah, that sort of psychotic projection that I had to do. I wrote this book in the first trimester. I finished this book in the first trimester of my pregnancy with my first child, and so in sort of communing with the dead while bringing a life, I felt like I needed her then more than ever. I needed her advice. This was the only thing I knew I certainly could not do, become a mother. And so I think it was out of necessity that I sort of forced her back into being. If I weren't going through such I almost said grotesque. If I weren't going through such a profound transformation, I don't think I would have needed that in the same way. And so that's really where that come from, was just hitting my son brought my grandmother back.
That's beautiful, because you got that sense from that in the book. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Bess, and thank you, Badisha.
Thank you.
So we're moving now to our next book, When Time Stopped, by Ariana Newman. And I would like to ask Anne to come and join me here on our Zoom stage, so to speak. And as Ariana said earlier, this is a book about her father, Hans, who was an extraordinarily courageous man who hid his past for decades after embarking on a new life and a family in Venezuela after the war. And Ariana constructs a story of a man with such chutzpah, how when many of his Czech family were being taken away to camps, he takes on a new identity and gets on the train to Berlin, at the very heart of Nazi Germany, to join a company, to join a factory there And when I was reading it, and some of it is actually in Hans's voice in a memoir, it is just such an extraordinary tale. I was just so moved by it.
Yes, me too. And I've read it more than once. I think it works at so many levels because, of course, it's a daughter's story at one level, and it's a detective story, and it's a thriller, and it's also a story of rediscovering grandparents who Arianna never knew. But if we're focusing on Hans, Arianna's father, I think this is unbelievably moving. I actually almost ached to feel what on earth would he make of this book, because there are various snapshots that you have throughout the book. When Arianna is growing up Catholic in Caracas, of course, she knows there's some sort of secret, but doesn't quite know what. Her father has nightmares and screams in the night, but he's a very successful industrialist who won't talk about that other past. But then he leaves clues. He takes her back to Prague and cries at the railway line where he said goodbye to his mother. And then, of course, when he dies, Arianna finds, in fact, there are more documents. So he's giving her a blessing to tell this story. But you rightly point out this period in Berlin when he's in hiding. And here is a daughter talking about her father's love life in Berlin. I think what I really admired about this book, amongst many things, were it's one thing to recreate your parents, although I don't think I could do it as you knew them, as older people, but to recreate your father as a young man, as this lucky man, as a fortunate man who plays pranks, and to recreate his friendships with Zdenka. I think that's what I almost admired most of all, to bring to life a young man when he's really living such a dangerous double life.
It is quite extraordinary. And Arianna, if you could join us, that would be great. I certainly felt that there was so much love you had for your father, for the father you knew and the father that on some level you knew even though you didn't know.
I did. I mean, this book, for me, I mean, it wasn't meant to be a book. It was really just a journey of discovery. I wanted to solve the mystery of my father. I knew he was keeping secrets, and I wanted to find out who he really was, and in so doing find my family and who I was. But it is really, I mean, the whole book is actually it's really just about him and about my love for him, as I knew him, and for him now as I know him, because he completely changed. So the man that I discovered in the letters and in the anecdotes had nothing to do with my father, so much so that it felt like he was someone else. And I think that distance allowed me to do what Anne talks about, just recreating him as accurately as I could, because it didn't seem like it was my father.
It was extraordinary, the level of detail, the way that you've got all these cousins and found all these people and all this family to give you so much documentation about your father and about his parents who go to Theresienstadt and go to Auschwitz, that I was like jealous of everything that you knew and all the hard work that you'd done to not only find it out, but then portray it in such a compelling way.
Well, I was insanely lucky in terms of documents, and you know, it is remarkable if you just knock on people's doors. These people just all opened their cupboards and their attics and their memories and shared with me the most intimate details of their parents or mothers. Their fathers or mothers, and it was, I was just very lucky in terms of material, really.
And then, of course, your father's own voice.
He wrote these memoirs in Spanish, actually, which was his fourth or fifth language. So they weren't that beautifully written, but they were filled with detail, and that was just absolutely key. And filled with documents. So I have over 1,000 pieces of documents, so I could document, the anecdotes and ensure that they really did happen, so that they were historically accurate, at least.
It's an extraordinary book. Thank you so much, Arianna, and thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you, Anne.
I want to turn now to A Peregrine by Colm McCann. And it's really hard in this discussion that I'm having with Andy here to pick on one character, because this novel is at its heart about a brotherly relationship, the brotherly love almost between two men, one Israeli and one Palestinian, and the parallels between their lives, because both of them have had their lives blown apart by the loss of a daughter. Bassam's daughter shot dead by an Israeli security guard. And we're going to focus on Rami El-Hanan, who is Israeli, and he lost his teenage daughter, Smada, to a suicide bombing, which happened when she was shopping with her friends in 1997. And before this, Rami was a apolitical graphic artist, although his wife was very politically active. And after the loss, he comes to join the parents' circle, where he meets Bassam, the Palestinian. And it's this parallel, you know, we understand more about Rami through his relationship. Do you agree, Andy?
I do, absolutely. I mean, these are the first thing to say. These are real individuals, and this novel is an incredibly delicate and successful attempt to capture their experience in a kind of fiction, and their stories are entwined exactly as you say. And we first meet Rami. He's riding his motorbike in the hills around Jerusalem on his way to the West Bank, where he's not supposed to be going to have a meeting with his colleagues in these reconciliation efforts, but he's going where history has really forced him to go, although all he wanted after fighting in Israel's wars, as he says in his own voice in the book, was to have a normal, quiet life. But unfortunately, history intervened. And a lot of the power of the book, of course, comes from the experiences of the fathers and their love for their daughters and their grief at losing them. But it also comes from the form in which Colum has found to tell their stories, because the stories are told simultaneously in fragments, in 1001 very carefully arranged fragments, which manage to tell their stories, and indeed many other stories about Israel and about the histories of the people who now live in Israel, and manages to hold all of these stories, including, above all, those of the two men and their daughters, in a kind of balance, and gives due respect to all of them.
And birds as well, as a sort of other character who fly in and out of the book in a really, really beautiful way.
Birds and archaeology and all kinds of history, all of which comes to seem actually germane as you read further into the book.
And Colum, could I ask you to join us now? And I was wondering about how you navigated these characters between what was their reality of their life, and yet this is a novel.
Yeah, well, first of all, can I just say I'm extraordinarily humbled by this experience, and delighted to be, able to talk about Rami and Bassam, who are, two incredible characters who use the force of their grief to navigate the world. It was a difficult thing at first for me as an Irish writer living in New York to say, well, will I risk myself? Will I risk sentiment? Will I risk humiliation even to enter into these worlds? But the force of their story was so much more than the force of even what I wanted to say. They captivate in some extraordinary ways the issues of the human heart, not just in Israel and Palestine, but it could be in Belfast, in Dublin, it could be in Kentucky and Bronx, and it could be in so many other places. And they gave me access to their stories, and it was one of the great honors of my life to be able to get to meet them, and also to get into a territory that confused me and buoyed me in simultaneous ways.
Go on, why?
Well, because I was confused, because the world is a messy place. I wanted to reflect some of the messiness that was going on. The book is told, as Andy said, in 1001 cantos or fragments, and initially it knocks you off balance. But as a reader, I want to be knocked off balance, because I want to disrupt the conventional narratives of what it might be to be, Irish or Israeli or Palestinian, which is exactly what Rami and Bassam happen to do. It's also the job of literature to do this, and you both sort of referred to this in a way, but maybe it's the job of literature not just to confront the heartbreak of what is going on, but maybe to honor it in a certain way. And what Rami and Bassam do in telling their stories is a Scheherazade-like thing. They keep their daughters alive. They lost their daughters, but they keep them alive by the humble an incredible act of storytelling which sort of knits the world together in extraordinary ways. We're joined together much more so by stories than we are even by molecules.
I mean, it is incredible because there's such a strong sense of profound grief that you feel, that the men feel for their daughters, understandably, but also about a profound desire for a better future. And that sense of hope was very beautiful.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, we have to dare to hope, sometimes in the face of all available evidence. I think the true bravery and true courage comes from the ability to believe that some of this will change. And I think the courage of these people is that, you know, they're on the right side of history and they tell the story in a very honest, powerful, and in sort of engaged way.
Thank you so much, Com, and congratulations on your book. And thank you, Andy. So I'd like to now talk about the final shortlisted book today. And Jonathan Safran first sends his apologies, he's not able to join us today, but I'd like to ask Anne, you to come out onto the Zoom stage and join. Because this book, We Are the Weather, is all about saving the planet and how to persuade us to make changes that we need to in our lives to lessen global warming. And primarily it's about eating less animal products, especially we have to wait until dinner. And the challenge, it's not really about the facts of climate change, it's about the challenge for us to conceptualize the scale of the threat. So today, as you've noticed, we're going by book and discussing one character in each book. And here, of course, it's not a novel or a book full of real fact or fiction characters, it is a polemic. So I've chosen, if you haven't read the book, an answer which might surprise you, which is the Holocaust in a book about climate change. Because in my mind, what makes the book especially unusual and interesting is how Safran Foer uses the inaction of the world to the unfolding horrors of climate change to draw parallels with the inaction of the world to the unfolding horrors of the camps of Europe, a faraway world, but drawing those parallels together. Anne, what did you make of it?
I thought it was brilliantly stimulating and well argued. It's an essay, really, and he digresses at various points and throws all sorts of interesting facts at you. But the essence of it is that facts alone are actually confusing and are not going to change people's minds. So he starts by telling what may be a well-known story to some of this audience of the Pole Jan Karski, who came to America with inside information of how the Jews were being killed and details about Auschwitz. And he saw one of the finest legal brains in America, Felix Frankfurter, on the Supreme Court. And he said to him, look, you have to do something, you have to intervene. This is what's happening. And his argument was remarkably well documented. And Frankfurter replied, it's not that I think you're not telling the truth, but I don't have the capacity to believe you. My imagination won't stretch, and effectively sent him away. And that really is so resonant that for Jonathan Safran Foer, he says, this is what we're going to have to account to for our children. If we don't do something, our children are going to say to us, what did you do to deal with climate change? Well, I happen to think climate change is one of the major issues we have to confront, but our imagination somehow can't comprehend what it'll do. We think, oh, well, it's a terrible thing, but, you know, we'll deal with that tomorrow. And he concludes with a final chapter also talking about the Holocaust, when his grandmother dies, and his grandmother and much of her family had been killed, but his grandmother survives. She escapes. And when she dies in America, he takes the opportunity to write a letter to his children, and he comes back to the Holocaust. So I think it's extremely well structured. And in between these really interesting digressions, I mean, he wrote it before COVID, but he actually talks about the polio vaccine and how Jonas Salk developed that. And there are some really interesting aspects in this, because I think it's argued like a well-structured, and what do I know about it, but it seems to me like a well-structured rabbinic essay. He's really using every Old Testament source that he can throw into it, and by the end you do feel I have to do something to change my life. So it won me over.
And it was also, you're completely right, it wasn't just through argument, because he knows that argument alone won't make the difference, but he uses that personal. At one point he said, you daydream about going from house to house of your grandmother's shtetl, grabbing the faces of those who would stay screaming. You know, he feels these things so passionately. It comes across so, you know, it is a very, very compelling,
Yes,
and an easy to read, interesting tale as well.
He's quite honest about his own shortcomings as well.
Yes, what was that during the other book that he wrote about animals, and then he go eating hamburgers in his hotel room. But I suppose that was at dinner, and that's allowed. He's calling us not to eat meat until dinner in order to make a difference. But thank you so very much, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just before the final announcement of who is going to be our winner from all the brilliant authors you've heard, I just wanted to do a bit of fun. So judging from
You'll
what...
see now. Start my video.
Oops,
yes, you are.
So just for a bit of fun, judging on what you've heard so far, or if you've read any of the books, who do you think is the winner or deserves to be the winner of the prize? So this is just a bit of fun, not too serious. And it will be just interesting if you could, in the next 30 seconds, just very swiftly, is it House of Glass? Nobody would tell you this but me. The Slaughterman's Daughter, Apeirogon, We Are the Weather, When Time Stopped, or On Division. So if you would like to quickly make a choice, if you feel like, and we'll just keep that open for another few seconds. And then if we can give the results. Tell you what, yeah, that's disappeared now. So I presume the results, maybe they will pop up. There we go. So When Time Stopped by Ariana Newman is the audience's choice, very closely followed by a tie between On Division and House of Glass, with everybody getting some votes, apart from Jonathan Safran, who got relatively few, but then he wasn't here to make his own case. So it's pretty well spread through. Thank you so much for having a bit of fun there. And now for the very special moment in the evening, and I want to hand over to the chair of judges, Rabbi Laura Jana Klausner, who is going to announce the winner of the Wingate Prize 2021. Laura.
Thank you. So it was a glorious, glorious experience for us, and we debated it for a long time. The book that has won the Wingate Prize for this year is The Slaughterman's Daughter by Yaniv Itzkovich, translated by Dr. Or Shaf. So kol hakavod and mazal tov.
Thank you.
Wow, I saw the wow in Israel. Whoa. Maybe your daughter did wake up to hear that.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. I mean, I built so many defense mechanisms, so it's hard for me even to believe that. No, but really, I'm so honored. I mean, this list is incredible, and these authors are, you know, I read them and. As being younger, and I admire them since then, and it's a huge and an extreme honor even to be considered. So really.
So we judged according to what is going to teach the world about Jewish life, and your book is so rich, and the translation I read it in English, and my partner David read it in Ivrit. The translation is glorious. So really, kol hakavod to Or, who is here. I saw he's here now. But I have just no words. But we were unanimous very early on. We absolutely adored it.
Wow. Listen, I owe, first of all, I really owe Or Sharf. You know, he really captured the sound of the book. and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all to translate it from Hebrew, and he did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And I also have to thank Macklehouse Press for loving the book and believing Alice Williams and Corina and Christopher Macklehouse. Of course, they believed in the book in a very early stage, and they did a marvelous thing, with the edit and the cover and the jacket and
Amazing.
everything.
Beautiful.
They put so much love into it, and obviously Deborah Harris from the Deborah Harris agency, who changed my life and believes so much in the book, and she loves the book. So I have so many people to thank, and of course, my wife and daughters, who are basically asleep right now, but
But they shouldn't grow up to do that, is all I want to say.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rabbi Laura.
And one more thing.
I want to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
But go on, you wanted to say something. Go on.
I just wanted to say thank you to the judges. I mean, obviously, it's such an honor even to be considered, and the fact that you let my characters speak louder is a truly tremendous experience. I think it's my best literary experience so far in my life. So I'm really, really grateful.
Well, I really personally think that this year's shortlist is really exceptional from however many of years of long and shortlist that I've read, but really delighted that this book is the winner, because it's an unexpected, utterly immersive journey into a world disappeared. It's a grand historical scale. It's full of Black humor. It's brilliantly translated by Orsha, so it's brilliantly written, reading it just in English. And it's so interesting because, you, of course, you're a philosopher. You were teaching at Tel Aviv University, and this is your third novel. And actually, my grandfather, who was Israeli, but he came from Khmelnyk, and I remember him telling me as a kid, when he was a kid, of Cossacks, banging on the door. In fact, his nose got broken by a fight with a local, thug. And so to me, I felt personally like having a glimpse of the world that he came from. It felt so exciting, and yet with a contemporary twist in terms of its sensibility about loyalty and revenge and family feuds, and also about extraordinary poverty. And I just wanted to ask you about your journey of research to be able to come up with such a rich insight into a world no longer there.
Wow, that's a great question, actually, because I really asked myself during writing this book, why go to the 90s? I didn't choose the subject of the book. When I saw those ads in the newspaper, I immediately knew that I'm going to write this novel, but I didn't actually know why. So I think that the real sources, the real origins of this book is my family, basically. I mean, everyone here, Hadley and Ariana, and wrote such beautiful books about their families. And for me, there's not much documentation and real facts of who they were before the war, or what they did, what they do, or what were their life. I didn't know anything, but I sensed always that my grandfathers, they were in Auschwitz with the numbers and all the horrible stories, but they also missed their previous war lives in Europe. And for me, it was such a huge conflict. On the one hand, I hear such terrible stories. You talked about thugs and the pogroms and, knocking on your door. And on the other hand, you miss your childhood in Siget, in Satu Mare, in Yassi, in all those places. So this huge conflict, I think it just developed within me. So this is why I think I went to this period to revive this lost world, to understand myself. Who am I? Who are my relatives? Where do they come from? What did they do?
And how has that changed you, that journey?
Oh, it completely changed me. It completely changed me. I think it starts from the Yiddish. In Israel, we kind of forgot the Yiddish. the Yiddish was the language of the Jew. It was the day-to-day language, and it was filled with humor and softness, and sometimes just accepting the world as it is and not trying to change it with power or force. And I kind of wanted to bring Yiddish into Israel today, okay, and not only to Israel, but I think that Bashevi Zinger, he once said that that Yiddish is not a language of victory. You don't storm with soldiers in Yiddish. So in Israel, when we experience, and Colum wrote about it a lot in his great book, when we have such an aggressive reality, when one is always a winner and one is a loser, one is a threat and one is defensive. So it was important for me to bring in the Yiddish because it really changed me. It really made me feel more related and close to my roots, to my family in Europe, and it helped me to remember them not only by their number on the left arm, but by what they really were.
It's an extraordinary story, Yaniv. A big mazel tov from all of the Wingate trustees and all the judges, and I'm sure everybody here who is taking part with us today. I also want, because at the start of the pandemic a year ago, we were planning to hold our annual event and the celebration, and we didn't therefore get a chance to congratulate last year's Wingate Prize winner, Linda Grant, for A Stranger City. So if you haven't got enough books for your reading list, please add this one too, as well as, of course, this year's winner, and on my bookshelf, all the other shortlisted authors. A few thanks before we finish up to Michaela Bromberg and Zoe Steele and the whole JW3 team for their partnership and support of the Wingate Prize throughout the year. Emma Shrimpley for all her work doing PR. And of course, our 4 brilliant judges for wading through over 70 books to find these jewels. And I think you'll agree that they are jewels. And of course, they had to do this without any face-to-face conversations. And it's such a pleasure as well to be joined by 6 of the shortlisted authors tonight. It's such a privilege. And for me to have read the books and then get even moments to talk with you and hear some of your thoughts. And a very, very big thank you to Juliet Simmons, who directs the Wingate Prize through this pandemic and through also some personal, very, very hard year, but she directed it with panache and creativity. And just before we went on air, so to speak, Rabbi Laura said she's been the North Star. And I thought that was really beautiful. I hope that you are inspired to get reading now. And for those watching via JW3, thank you for entering the competition. And the winner of all of my bookshelf, but the new ones, not my thumbed ones, is Eleanor Narod, and we'll be in touch with you to send you the books. Which one, though, are you going to read first? Enjoy. Thank you so very much for joining us.